All right, so the Sportsman front shock suspension swap is complete. It's looking very mean and very tall. We'll see how long the axles survive. Just measured everything again after I drove it around and let it settle. The rear shocks are set at 2 clicks from soft. The front shocks are 3 clicks from soft. I got 2 and almost like 2 3/8 inches of lift in the rear, which is pretty awesome considering how narrow this thing is. And in the front, I got just about 2 inches of lift compared to stock shocks and stock shock mounts. So it's a lot taller. The back is slightly higher, so it has some kind of rake sitting to it, which is fine, right? Once you throw a cooler on there and some people in it, it's not really gonna be noticeable. Woo! Oh yeah! What a machine! That was a little teaser for you. I've got another video coming out in a couple of days where I do some more testing and give you some more opinions on how the ride is. But just the bottom line up front, this is a great mod. The p500 is so much more fun. I can actually drive it hard and jump it without, either flying out of it or damaging my spine. Really awesome mod. Very cheap. You got to do it if you got a welder or a friend with a welder. All right, so I got 4 Sportsman 1000 front shocks. These were super cheap on eBay. And it looks like these are off an older unit. These are off a newer unit. So I'm gonna obviously put this style on one, probably on the front, and this style on the back. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Same length, but a different looking, this is an aluminum adjuster, those are steel. Same part number though, because that's how Polaris is. These shocks do have some corrosion, they're not beautiful, but it was like $100 for a whole set, so can't complain too much. As you can see, they're a lot bigger than the Pioneer 500 shocks, a lot more travel and a lot more damping. So let's see the difference in length. They're about 1 3/4 inches longer overall, which means in the front, custom shock mounts will be required. I've already built up some crazy lower shock mounts because I moved my arms forward and I built some lift into them. So I'm probably gonna cut a bunch of that off and modify it to fit this shock. Took my tabs that were up here and I clocked them. I got them as far in as I could, and I set the right amount of down travel, so no limiting strap needed. And then I kind of tied it into this little brace over here. I think it'll be plenty strong. It looks a little goofy because I designed it for the stock shocks and then cut it off and redid this. If I was gonna do it from scratch, I would probably grind off this, this little guy right here, use a shorter piece of steel to go across to bring the strength back, and then just put 2 tabs right on top of it. But this I'm sure will work just fine. Nice and burned in with the old Amazon Yes welder. Now bolt up the shock and I'll show you what it looks like. Shock is pretty close to the ball joint. The wheel's all the way out here with the wheel spacer and stuff, and that leverage does kind of count against the shock. But the motion ratio has definitely changed. The shock used to be up here, now it's out here. Even though I moved the shock farther out, I did a little bit of rough math, I'm still getting way more travel out of the front because this shock is so much longer travel. You see it has all this shininess up here. The other shock had about that much. So what we're gonna see here is how much sag we have. So these shocks are currently set at the softest preload setting. It had a little bit of sag. That's amazing, even without rolling it, because the old shocks, the factory p500 shocks, oh yeah, yes. That's gonna be much softer. Of course, I can crank it the preload if I'm gonna do a ride where I really require maximum ground clearance. All right, starting to work on the rear shock. So that's the Pioneer 500 rear shock. Absolutely pathetic. Look at the size difference, right? Just pathetic Honda, but whatever. It's a cheap little ATV, we get it. As far as length goes, the new shock is 2 3/8 inches longer. So a good bit longer. And that's what we wanted because the Pioneer 500 has longer rear arms and axles than it does in the front. The front has that one little short axle. Both these axles are fairly long. Therefore, you can get more travel out of it. Honda just decided not to. They put a really, really tiny shock on it, right? So first thing to do is figure out where we want to set this thing as far as down travel wise, what our max down travel is going to be. And then we got to figure out how we're going to mount this sucker. One thing I failed to account for is that the front shocks are M10 hardware and the rear shock is M12 hardware. So I got to figure out how I'm going to deal with that too. Probably just drill out the holes a little bit. But yeah, the rear shocks are even shorter than the front shocks on the Pioneer. pretty sad. Spring rate looks similar. All right, one side is done. So what I went ahead and did was I reused the factory bottom mount location because I like how it's well braced and everything. All I had to do was put a washer next to it as a shim because this shock is a little narrower on the bottom. It's a 10 millimeter hole from the factory. I bored it out to 12 millimeters so I could reuse the factory hardware. Up top, it's a 10 millimeter bolt, which is plenty strong enough because it's fully supported. Just used some crap metal I had laying around, made a little bracket that fits over the frame there. This support here is designed to support the top of the shock from the factory, so it's strong, you know, and it's welded around there, around there, around there. So I don't think it's going anywhere. Also, it's got way better damping now, and it's got a better bump stop, so there shouldn't be as many hard hits of using the shock mount. It's amazing nothing broke, considering the bump stops had completely disintegrated on the old shocks. So it's almost straight up and down, right? And I was able to add almost 2 inches of down travel. In the back, I think I've added about 60% more travel. In the front, added about 40% more travel. So the back is definitely, there's definitely more to give because the axles are longer. You can get more out of it. But I think it's a worthwhile mod on the front just to get the increased damping. Also, I was recently accused of misrepresenting modifications and making them seem easier than they are. And that might be true because the video's snapshots, right? This mod, putting all 4 of these shocks on this thing took me like 4 hours today. And a lot of the stuff I don't usually show is like, there's a big fat weld here you gotta grind smooth so that your metal can sit flat against the bar. Now, of course, I'm gonna chamfer the bottom of the metal to sit against that weld, so I'm not completely cutting that weld off. But because I'm gonna weld right here and weld right here, that weld is not as important. You want to sit flush against this bar. Same thing on this side. Also, drilling out the spacer for this takes forever, right? To drill out a spacer that long, take out 2 millimeters of material, that takes a long time with the drill bit. I was sitting here frickin' forever. That's that pile of metal shavings. Yeah, I don't know, just trying to be more realistic in how I portray these jobs because, you know, it's a simple mod. All you're really doing is welding on some tabs and drilling out a thing down there. But to do it right and have it last actually takes a good amount of time. The welding is fast. The welding is the fun part. It's all the prep work that takes forever, all the grinding, the cutting, and the drilling. All right, about to burn this one in. I got my kind of Texas shaped mount here. Now, full disclosure, I wish both the mounts were this big, right? This is a little bit thicker than this metal back here, and it's a taller piece. I'm working with what I got. This piece is a little small. So, you know, it's not gonna be as strong. It's not as thick, and you don't have as much weld. But, you know, working with what you got, it'll be plenty strong, probably. If not, I'll rebuild it stronger, but generally my shit works, so, you know, I'll give it a shot. I'm probably gonna tack it in a few spots to get the shock out of the way to finish it. But yeah, that's about as much prep work as I do before I start welding with my shit flux core welder. And yeah, seems to work okay. The reason there's a bushing here is because I want to sandwich this piece of frame because it's nice and stiff and designed for shock mounting. 2 inches, 1.5 inches here is 2 inches here, right? That's how it works. Do the geometry. So yeah, I did do some math, and I always do when I do a shock swap. I just kind of freehand some stuff, do a couple angles, a little bit of trigonometry to make sure I'm ballpark getting stuff close. Because yeah, you know, changing the angle of the shock matters, changing the motion ratio matters. In this case, I'm running a softer spring, so I wanted to make the angle more straight up and down to give the shock a little better leverage. If you want to copy this, that's how far away my shock is from the frame. I got it as close as I could, right there. And the shock's pretty close to the brackets, but not touching it. And this is worst case scenario, right? As the shock comes out, it'll get more clearance from the bracket. So proceed at your own risk, as usual. All right, Dad, I got that all burned in. It's ugly, there's a lot of splatter, but really good penetration. I'm confident it's gonna work just fine. Yeah. Every time I do one of these videos, someone gets on my ass, you shouldn't be welding. Just because you have a welder doesn't mean you should be using it, yada, yada, yada. I can't remember the last time anything I welded failed. If this does fail, I'll be the first to tell you. That way you can beef it up a little bit more. Maybe use a longer piece of steel, go all the way across, bigger metal, thicker, whatever. I'll let you know what happens. But generally my shit's just fine, even though it looks like crap. Flux core is never gonna be pretty or as pretty as like nice shield gas. But you can get good penetration. It's just, you know, there's some splatter to deal with, and it's never gonna be a perfect weld, but I think that's gonna work just mint. I did go ahead and remove the sway bar, and I was not in the mood for a brain teaser, so I just cut it in half. That is a really pathetically thin sway bar. But it hadn't broken in half yet, 4,000 miles of use, so there's something. I don't like sway bars. They reduce articulation. This thing is too slow to need them. And yeah. All right, so something that's interesting is the arms are so short that my 2-inch lift actually sucked the tires in a lot. So if you look down the side of the machine, look how much wider the front is than the back now. The thing we like to do, drop the weight on it and see how much it sags. Oh, I saw some glorious sag there. Ground clearance, hugely improved, even at the softest preload setting. All right, so the back of the machine is sitting a lot higher. You really notice it when I put the bed on, how high the rack is now. I mean, it looks very formidable. Kind of looks like the back of a 1000 with that amount of ground clearance. So pretty happy about that. We'll see how long the axle survive with those angles, but it is up there. So we definitely got more ground clearance. And if we can get a better ride, this is gonna be the best Pioneer 500 mod ever, because these things lack ground clearance, they lack ride quality, and they lack articulation. So if this thing can flex better, man, I'm gonna be happy as can be. Also, no sway bar is gonna increase the flex as well, but it's looking quite formidable now for a P5 without portals or a long arm kit. And to be honest, those Walker Evans shocks you guys all spend a fortune on, they're really too small. I don't like the angles, and the bodies are tiny. If you have a stock P500 or something like that, you can do a comparison for yourself to see if this is a worthwhile mod for you just for the lift and ground clearance. So right under the hitch, I'm sitting right at 16 inches. And where's a good spot to measure in the front? Plate, give you an idea of that. About 14 inches at the bottom of the skid plate. So like I said, it is raked. It's got more clearance in the back than the front right now. That's kind of how they are from the factory too, because the front arms are so short and the front axles are so short. So it's got a little rake to it, but that's fine. Again, I have adjustable preload front and rear now, so I can fine tune it if I cared, but I think that amount of rake is good. It definitely doesn't feel bad from the driver's seat at all. It feels, man, this thing feels taller and softer though. I love that.